It's 5 years since Mauricio Pochettino was sacked ruthlessly by Daniel Levy. I remember where I was, and I'm not afraid to admit that I cried. A man who almost single-handedly changed the narrative around Tottenham Hotspur and made teams and fans fear us, whilst also enjoying the beautiful and endlessly physical football that we played. In today's episode, I'll be giving my own memories of that amazing period, and we'll also bring you the latest news on Bentancur's ban and Spurs' weird latest brand reinvention. All that on today's episode of the Spurred On Podcast. Guys, as ever, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening. Please do press that like button if you're on YouTube. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber for daily Tottenham Hotspur and Premier League transfer content. But today, just because it's the 5-year anniversary of that sacking of Mauricio Pochettino, I thought I'd talk about my memories of that incredible Spurs period. Without a doubt, the best period of watching Tottenham Hotspur and supporting Tottenham Hotspur in my lifetime. A time that the narrative was completely changed around Spurs. The narrative that's actually gone back to where it was previously today. That word that I refuse to use that sums up Tottenham as a team who managed to grab defeat from the jaws of victory. Well, nobody was talking about Tottenham like that during the majority of Mauricio Pochettino's reign, because he was a man who was in the right place at the right time, with the right attributes, with the will, with the determination and the tactical nous to bring a squad of players who in the most part had previously been underwhelming or perhaps underappreciated by the fans, as well as some academy graduates, brought them together as a young, hungry, exciting team that so nearly took us to the promised land. So what do I remember about those Mauricio Pochettino years? Well, starting with him getting the job. Of course, he had been previously Southampton's manager. We managed to snare him from Southampton, where he'd done an incredible job at the Dell. He changed Southampton from being a relegation-threatened side with no real clear identity or strategy to a high-pressing team of young, exciting talent, most of which all went on, didn't they, to sign for big clubs. Adam Lallana, for instance, Virgil van Dijk, to name but two. And Pochettino, really kind of having done well at Espanyol before that, came to the Premier League speaking very little English and really turned heads at Southampton. And it was Daniel Levy who took the chance on him. And one of the first things that Daniel Levy did, if you remember, he insisted that Mauricio Pochettino, who had previously only spoken Spanish in his press conferences while at the St Mary's Stadium for Southampton, he made him speak English. And all the rumours coming out around Pochettino was that actually he spoke English a lot better than he made out. But it was when he came to Spurs under Daniel Levy that he first started speaking English in press conferences. And those really early days, I think we were excited at the thought of having a kind of forward-thinking, high-pressing side. But also there were doubts as fans, weren't there, as to whether our team could really do it, as whether we had the players with the attributes to play that kind of physically difficult style of football. But it came to the first league game and it was West Ham away, one of the traditionally hardest games for Spurs, going to Upton Park. And if you remember, Eric Dyer on his debut for the club, a player who'd been brought in from Sporting Lisbon, English but with Portuguese heritage, playing at right back, I believe, on the day, actually got a through ball from Harry Kane in the last minute of the game and so confidently rounded the keeper and slotted it home. And to say there were limbs in the away end would be an understatement. So that was a great start for Pochettino, but that first season or season and a bit, there were doubts and of course, lots of pressure, very similar to what's happening now with Ange Postecoglou really. Pressure being put on by fans, being put on by pundits, being put on by the media in terms of, is this the right man for Tottenham Hotspur? Yes, he has them playing in an attacking, in a stylish way, and they have a clear identity, but the results are so up and down. And we went to Aston Villa, didn't we? We went to Villa Park one evening, and it took Harry Kane's kind of late free kick that was deflected by the wall into the net to really turn around the fortunes of Mauricio Pochettino's Tottenham. And really what happened around that time, and it needed to happen, was a changing of the old guard. Pochettino saw enough from the likes of Yunus Kabul, Emmanuel Adebayor, Roberto Soldado, etc. to say, sure, you're on big wages and you've been signed for huge amounts of money, but you are not as hungry and motivated as this young crop of talent coming through the academy, the likes of Andros Townsend, the likes of Harry Kane, of course, and many, many more. And they all started to get their chances, and it was that goal from Kane against Aston Villa that really pushed him ahead of Soldado, of Adebayor. Previously, he'd really only mainly played in the Europa League games, but now Kane was starting to start for Spurs. But also, reports from behind the scenes were that Harry Kane and Ryan Mason were the kind of leaders of this young group of players who were basically pushing back against the senior players within the changing room and basically saying to Pochettino, we're here and we're ready, and if you trust us, we will repay that trust. And by God, did they. And then, of course, there was the famous New Year's Day game against Chelsea at White Hart Lane. I'm very happy to say I was there, and that was kind of Harry Kane's proper rebirth as an elite player. He scored those 2 wonderful goals, didn't he? And Spurs absolutely trounced Chelsea at a time where Chelsea were one of their best teams, had one of their best teams. And I remember getting text messages as I was walking down the Seven Sisters Road after that game from some of my friends, none of whom who support Spurs, but all of them just going, holy shit, Harry Kane is a proper player. And then also in that season, that turnaround, wasn't it? In one of Mauricio Pochettino's earliest North London derbies, the home game, where we were 1-0 down, I think at half-time and going on quite a while into the second half, and Harry Kane got that headed winner to turn it around 2-1. And I was drunk enough in the pub watching that game that I put a bet on at half-time where we were 1-0 down that we would win 2-1 at 25-1. I think I put 10 quid on it, won 250 quid. So that was one of the great weekends of my life. And it was those games, the Chelsea game, the Arsenal game, that suddenly made us start to believe, could this Mauricio Pochettino side actually be a side that really pushes us back towards the Champions League where we'd only really got in previously under Harry Redknapp? Was this a side that actually could make us believe again? And it really was the starting point of something wonderful. As I mentioned, just his ability, Mauricio Pochettino, to get a team pushed together and believing in each other from a group of players like Kyle Walker, like Danny Rose, maybe a little bit with the likes of Jan Vertonghen, players who had come in before but hadn't quite covered themselves in glory, but then with the additions of Toby Alderweireld, with Victor Wanyama, who came in a season or so later, and then Eriksen finally hitting his best form since he came in as one of the 7 who replaced Gareth Bale. He was actually really, apart from maybe borderline Nacer Chadli, really the only genuine success out of those 7 who came in after we sold Gareth Bale. And all of those players suddenly came together, and when it then came into the addition the following season of the likes of Dele Alli coming in at a steal at £5 million, a player who was really bought in for the future, someone that David Pleat had recommended to the club, and Daniel Levy, he pulled the trigger on it, and Liverpool were interested, and it looked like Dele Alli was going to go to Liverpool, but Spurs nicked in ahead of them, and Dele Alli came in, and he was almost like what I'd call like the Cantona effect for Spurs. When Eric Cantona joined Manchester United from Leeds, and Man United hadn't won the league for so many years, and they needed just that extra something. Well, when Spurs brought in Dele Alli, and Pochettino had the bravery to start playing him from the very first. Remember, he scored that equaliser against Leicester. It wasn't an equaliser actually, was it? It was to put Spurs ahead against Leicester away from home in I think only his second game and the team's second game in that 15-16 season. And sure, Riyad Mahrez went on to equalise for Leicester, but that goal for Dele Alli was huge, and that was a season where Dele Alli really made his mark. That was, of course, the season, the 15-16 season, where it looked like Spurs might even win the title. The famous third in a 2-horse race where Leicester did the fairy tale. But Spurs were just majestic that season. I remember time and time again, because of my experience of supporting Spurs for so many years, I was just like, well, we're going to drop off. And we didn't. We went to Manchester City, went to the Etihad, won there. Eriksen with the winner, if you remember. I was at that game. Just unbelievable times where we kept on winning and just kept on proving it. And in the end, it was just a step too far as Chelsea, if you remember, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, another game I was at. I was actually in the away end. The only ticket I could get, so I was in the home end. The only ticket I could get was a Chelsea seat. And so I was having to sit on my hands as we went 2-0 up through Son and Kane. And it was just so exciting at that point. And then in the second half, just the mentality dropped off. We lost our heads a little bit. We got sucked into the occasion. The Stamford Bridge crowd got behind them. And Chelsea basically played their only good game that season. It was a horrible season for them, wasn't it? Mourinho ending up getting sacked. But they got their 2-2 draw, Eden Hazard scoring in the last few minutes to make Spurs suffer and give Leicester basically the league title. But I didn't come away from that 15-16 season feeling completely gutted. It felt like everything kind of conspired against us. Everybody wanted Leicester to win that Premier League. It was the fairy tale for them, and it happened. But I felt under Pochettino we were growing. We had the stadium starting to be built around White Hart Lane, the new stadium. And then it was that following season where we didn't lose a single game at White Hart Lane. Nothing. We were absolutely invincible there. We were amazing. And it was only Antonio Conte's Chelsea in his kind of perfect storm season for them where they got so many points, and Spurs had the most points they've ever had in the Premier League, like high 80s, wasn't it? And so many seasons where Tottenham would have won the title with that amount of points, but Chelsea went on to win it. And then the rest of Pochettino's tenure at Spurs, 2 title tilts, 1 Champions League final, 2 FA Cup semi-finals, 1 League Cup final. And sure, the negatives will say we didn't win any of those finals, we didn't get it over the line. But the club, and I mentioned this in a video yesterday, the club were just outdoing themselves in terms of the plan that Levy and the board had put together. The plan was to build the stadium, get into the stadium, use the revenue to buy the players to get into the Champions League and grow from there. And Pochettino's brilliance as a manager got us about 5 to 10 years ahead of schedule on that. And therefore, when it came to us needing to rebuild, as Pochettino said himself, it needed a painful rebuild as some of those players were getting to the end of that cycle of being able to play that high intensity, high pressing football. We weren't, unfortunately, able to spend on players at that moment when we really needed to. And that is what killed us in the end. And that is why we went into a Champions League final that was incredible that we got there, but with a midfield of Moussa Sissoko and Harry Winks. And that's the reality of it, guys. Lots of people talk about that Champions League final and think, oh, he played Kane instead of Lucas Moura, and that's why we lost. No, it was because we hadn't rebuilt the team so that we had strong enough players in central midfield. And then after that Champions League final, everyone came back the following season to pre-season. And I listened to Charlie Eccleshare, I think it was, it might have been Jack Pitt-Brooks, in this week's View from the Lane podcast, and they said that the following season when the players came back for pre-season, the vibes weren't there anymore. Because of the lack of rebuild, the players had reached the end, and Pochettino had kind of reached his natural end too. But that didn't mean that it wasn't absolutely gutting when he was sacked. There'd been a year of bad away form. There was, like I mentioned, the painful rebuild that had never happened, and then Daniel Levy invited the Amazon cameras into the dressing room, and that was one of the final straws, I think, in terms of getting Pochettino to be motivated to do it all again. I think he was just down on his luck, and I think the players felt that. And I think that when he was sacked, although in hindsight I would say we should have just stuck with Pochettino for as long as possible, let him be like the Diego Simeone of Tottenham Hotspur, by which I mean at Atletico Madrid over 10 years that Diego Simeone has been manager. He's had a few bad seasons and they've allowed him to rebuild, and we should have done the same with Pochettino. But also you can see why at the time, and I'll admit that at the time I was a little bit blown away by the fairy tale of the idea that then we've just got to a Champions League final, we've got this squad, we can bring in a proven winner, we can bring in Jose Mourinho. But it didn't mean that I was any less upset when Pochettino was sacked. I was there in a friend's kitchen, I read about it, and I shed a tear. It was a devastating time, but none of that takes away from just what a glorious period of 5 years or so that was under Mauricio Pochettino. Never in my lifetime did I think I'd watch Spurs at a Champions League final, and I was lucky enough to be in Madrid. And sure, it was only 22 seconds of time of that game that I found it enjoyable, but the 3 weeks before it were just unbelievable, where Arsenal fans everywhere were absolutely having kittens, panicking that Tottenham might win the Champions League before them. And that 3 weeks where everyone was just behind Spurs, wanted Spurs to win. And I think it was Everton home game, the last game of the season before that Champions League final, where we were at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It was just a party atmosphere, and they had Brandon Block playing as a DJ outside the stadium after the game, and the sun was out. It was just absolutely magical, and they can never take that away from us. And one thing I will say about this strategy that we now have, finally, under Scott Munn, under Johan Lange, under Big Ange Postecoglou, they are rebuilding. They're properly rebuilding, and they want to do it again. They want to grow to that place again. And we have to be patient. Like we were patient with Pochettino in the early years, we have to be patient again with Postecoglou. And I know it feels difficult to be after that Ipswich result, but who knows? Who knows where we can go? Okay, let me know in the comments what your memories were, what your best memories were of the Pochettino era, how you felt and where you were when he was sacked. I'd love to hear your stories. Let me know. Just go on to some more Spurs news now. Before I do, please do, if you haven't already, press like on this video. I'd love more Spurs fans to see it and to subscribe to the channel. If you're not already a subscriber, press that subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner for daily Tottenham Hotspur content and Premier League and transfer content from wider afield as we get closer to that transfer window opening, and every report coming out says that Spurs are going to look to improve this January. Anyway, I'm sure you heard finally yesterday the 7-game ban for Rodrigo Bentancur has finally officially come out. The statement released by the FA said the following: an independent regulatory commission has imposed a 7-match suspension and a £100,000 fine on Rodrigo Bentancur for a breach of FA Rule E3 in relation to a media interview. It was alleged that the Tottenham midfielder breached FA Rule E3.1 as he acted in an improper manner and/or used abusive and/or insulting words and/or brought the game into disrepute. It was further alleged that this constitutes an aggravated breach, which is defined in FA Rule E3.2 as it included a reference, whether expressed or implied, to nationality and/or race and/or ethnic origin. Rodrigo Bentancur denied this charge, but the Independent Regulatory Commission found it to be proven and imposed his sanctions following a hearing. Now, the fascinating thing for me is that despite Rodrigo Bentancur coming out in public and speaking to Sonny privately after the story broke, which I think was as far back as June, that's how long these things take, he said in those apologies that he made a mistake and that he didn't mean it, but that he took full responsibility and apologized. And that was the right thing to do, and that, frankly, was where I wanted to draw a line under it. But now that this has come out, and all the reports in what has come out from that hearing say that Rodrigo Bentancur's defense was different in his hearing, and he tried to say that it was the journalist's fault and that he was just reacting to something that the journalist said in the media interview and was being sarcastic off the back of that. And I have to say to Bentancur, who I love as a player, that is not a good look, and it has put Tottenham in a very difficult position, I think, because he's been banned for 7 games from English football, so that's English Premier League and Cup games, but he is not banned from Europa League games, and there are 2 Europa League games in that period of time. And it will be interesting to see, after what has happened, whether Tottenham can, with their heads held high, actually play Bentancur in those Europa League games. I think if they do, it will be very, very bad optics. But as I've talked about in a number of videos on this channel and elsewhere, Daniel Levy is never afraid to make things look bad. And I fear that if Ange Postecoglou goes to Daniel Levy and says, should I play Bentancur in these Europa League games to give Bissouma a bit of a break and allow for some squad rotation, Levy might say yes, but actually I think personally, and let me know what you think in the comments, I personally think that we should just leave him off the team sheet for this duration of this 7 English games, and then that will enable us to properly draw a line under it. I fear if we play him in any of these Europa League games during that period, the story will just be brought back up again over and over and over again, and we need to draw a line under it. Bentancur made a mistake. He apologised. He's then kind of made himself look a bit silly, I think, by not just admitting his guilt, by saying he was not guilty. And I think we just have to give him a few games, 7 games, and the Europa League games out of the Spurs team so that he can really understand. He's also been asked to do an educational course as part of his punishment, along with the fine and the ban, and hopefully he can just do that and we can just stay quiet and stay out of it. Another little report that came out yesterday was that the length of Rodrigo Bentancur's ban and the process has surprised other clubs, together with perceived inconsistencies over punishments handed out to other players for racist offences. Well, the one that comes to mind, of course, is the Chelsea one, isn't it? The Argentinian Chelsea player Fernandez Enzo, who chanted some racist stuff on a team bus in Argentina. That one hasn't been picked up by the FA. There's a belief that Spurs and Bentancur have been made an example of, and that the player's own apology and the backing of Son were in the end used against him. Tottenham do have the right to appeal the verdict and are considering their next steps. The club has not commented on the ban, although there is thought to be some bewilderment and frustration around it. Well, once again, if I was Spurs, I would not appeal, please do not appeal. A, there's the chance that the ban could be extended, but also, like I said, just the optics makes it look bad, makes it look like it's not being taken seriously enough. And this is a racist incident, and it was serious, and we need to try and draw a line under it. With that in mind, Ben Davis was asked about it yesterday while on international duty. He said, "I read the news this morning, probably just like everyone else did. As a group, as a team at Tottenham, we've all drawn a line under the incident and moved on. But I think ultimately, it's important that we realise that these kind of things need to be looked at with this kind of seriousness." I completely agree, and that's why Ben Davis is such a great professional. That is the reality of these things. There's so many, kick racism out of football, so many of these things, but just stuff keeps cropping up, and we need to be harsh when these things happen. Finally, as I mentioned at the top, a bit of a weird bit of news coming out of Spurs yesterday, which is that Spurs have redesigned their logo and done a rebrand in terms of all Tottenham Hotspur assets. Spurs on the new logo said the following: "We've removed the curved Tottenham Hotspur text from beneath the cockerel. This enables us to increase its scale across different environments and stand proud as a true icon for the club." What do you guys think about that? Let me know in the comments, because there are some people coming out on social media saying that this is another attempt to remove the reality of Spurs being a football club from its brand, so that the brand can be seen more as an entertainment brand. There's some anger on Twitter especially. I don't know, I think it's probably more nuanced than that, but the other stuff that has happened, it's called by Tottenham a remastered brand identity. The remastered brand is the culmination, apparently, of a 9-month journey with sports branding specialist Studio Nomad, gathering input from over 300 players, staff and fans. The world-famous cockerel stands prouder than ever and is supported by a silhouette version, along with the reintroduction of the THFC monogram and new colours, patterns and hallmarks linked to the club's heritage. Now, one thing I will say is I love the THFC monogram, and that is one thing I am pleased about. That really does show the tradition. It's the kind of THFC that's all blended together. It's a really old school traditional Spurs thing, and it looks great. I love the font of it, and that's something I'm really pleased that has come back. The rest of the bump says this: "A club of first, Tottenham Hotspur took an unprecedented step in 2006 to modernise its identity by simplifying the badge around its world-famous cockerel. That has since stood alone in minimalistic, iconic fashion, and which other clubs are now doing." That's true. If you think about all the clubs that have changed their logo since Spurs were one of the first to do it, you have to say, that is true. We did do that first. Today, the cockerel stands prouder than ever, as mentioned, and is supported by a silhouette version that allows for a more playful expression of the brand. Not sure what that really means. We've reintroduced the THFC monogram, a fan favourite from the 50s that went on to feature heavily on the club's badge for many years. We've modernised and remastered it. I'd love it if that came back onto the shirt. For instance, if it was put on the back at the top of the shirt, that would be really cool. Colours and patterns built from iconic elements of the club's past have also been introduced, as well as a suite of hallmarks developed to celebrate key heritage features, including the Seven Sisters trees, Bruce Castle, and 1882, the club's founding year. Well, if you remember at all the previous badge, they were some of the iconic things that were on that previous badge. So good to see them reintroducing that. The club's iconic font has also been given a new lease of life, turning a single display font into a dynamic, variable family of fonts that are unmistakably Spurs. I mean, it goes on a little further, but it's all, let's face it, bullshit. But I'm glad that that monogram is back. Let me know what you think of the rebranding in the comments below, guys. Let's have a conversation about it. But thank you so much for watching and listening to today's episode. Please do press that subscribe button. Do like the video. And now only 4 days away from that big game against Man City. Let's get behind the boys. Come on, you Spurs.